floor's uneven. Almost there. Got it. No. No. I'm rolling away. No. Make a stop. Today we're going to be covering questions about why various guns are trash, and will the Supreme Court see a new Second Amendment case coming soon? Welcome back, you reprobates. Today we're doing your questions, my answers. Some of y'all have got kind of dark out there. Just going to throw that out there. So if you got a sensitive constitution, you might move on from today's video, and the rest of y'all need to go get looked at. What I did is I put up a question thread up on the communities tab asking for your guys' questions. I have since archived those questions and pulled that one down. So if you are seeing a solicitation post up there, that is for the next episode. Thank you very much. If you got a question, go ahead and put it up there and we'll see if it makes it to the show. So what we're going to do is we're going to read these ones in order. And basically, I'm going to shuffle them in post-production so that they're next to all of the relevant questions of the same type. Today's first question, how can you support the VSO Gun Channel? Well, there's a whole bunch of different methods that you can do that through. First is by visiting our affiliates page, but you can also contribute directly to the channel by seeing any of our crowdfunding pages, as well as becoming a member here at the channel. I'm just kidding. That wasn't actually a question. Let's move on to the actual real questions now. So the first question comes from Skylar Bieber. How can we as citizens get rid of the NFA and GCA? Those laws are blatantly unconstitutional, and not a single 2A advocacy group has challenged it. Well, I'm going to first start with the second half of your question, that statement there about 2A advocacy groups not challenging it. I'm going to direct you specifically to the most recent filings from the Firearms Policy Coalition, who absolutely, in their pistol brace litigation, have drawn into question the constitutionality of short barrel rifles. So no, it's factually inaccurate to say that no Second Amendment advocacy groups are challenging it. They are indeed challenging it, particularly the new wave. So back to the original synopsis of the question, how can we as citizens impact this? And the answer that a lot of people are not going to like, but is the truth, is to make purchasing decisions inside those product categories. The ammunition that we are using to fight this fight is a whole bunch of different precedents. One of them is the common use precedent. So if you want to positively impact the status of any kind of constitutional challenge as it relates to things like suppressors, SBRs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you need to bump those numbers up. Those common use numbers need to go through the roof, and the only way that you can do that is to make more of them. How do we make more of them? More people have to buy them. So if you want to positively impact the fight for NFA deregulation, then you need to go be buying suppressors, short barrel rifles, et cetera, et cetera. File Form 4s and Form 1s is the answer to that question. So moving on, this one comes from a Theodor Heinz, probably saying that wrong, but it sounds kind of German. How/why is the Steyr AUG the best, most modular rifle of its time and still the third most common military rifle in the world today? Well, I'm also going to start at the end of that question and say that I don't know that it is a statistical fact that it is the third most common military rifle in the world today. If that is indeed a true fact, then the answer to the rest of the question is that the people that are using them have no idea what they're doing. The Steyr AUG is probably one of the worst common use military rifles in service today, and I'm going to make my case for that now. First off, it is a 1977 production rifle that has been modernized over the years, but even though it has been modernized over the years, it has not been modernized anywhere close to what we would consider on par with any of the other rifles that have been modernized, like the AK-47 or things like the M4, M16 type platforms. It shows its age, is what I'm saying. First off, exposed piston that is really close to your head makes it really difficult to suppress. It has been suppressed successfully, but it requires a whole lot of finagling to do that. It has to have a gas bleed off into the suppressor housing. It's exceptionally expensive and hard to install. Next, any firearm that uses a crosspin safety is not up to speed, okay? It uses a crosspin safety that you can push one way, without removing your hand from the firing controls, but you cannot return it the other way without taking your hand out of the firing controls. That is completely unacceptable, and it's just simply not a good design. Also, not use of standard NATO magazines is an issue that has recently been fixed, but they are still producing them with the standard AUG pattern. They also look very similar to M4, M16 magazines, and if you try to shove a AUG magazine in an M4, then it will get jammed. If you try to shove an M4 magazine in an AUG, it will sort of hang there for a second and then fall out when you need it most. So there's a problem there with supply chain. And then also, I'm going to point you to the dual functioning auto trigger on that thing. So basically, you pull the trigger to the first stop, it gives you one round. You pull it the rest of the way through, and it gives you full auto. This ends up creating a really janky trigger, and it just simply adds to the inaccuracy of the weapon. The weapon is inaccurate to begin with. It is relatively reliable when kept squeaky clean, but if you fire any number of rounds through it, then it starts to have issues, and it doesn't have any battery assists or anything like that included on the rifle. So when you get it dirty and it stops working, it will stop working, and it will require major maintenance to bring it back up. Now, in closing on the Steyr AUG, I pulled up the Wikipedia page, which is not a reputable source by any stretch of the imagination, but they list the effective range of that weapon system at 300 meters, which is abysmal and in line with my experience. The gun just simply is not a very accurate weapon. They've done some things over the years to increase the modularity by taking that janky optics mount or integral optic off of it and giving you a Picatinny rail that thing is now mounted to, so you can put real optics on the thing and have a chance, but that does not negate the fact that the way the gun is designed, it just simply does not hold very tight groups. Part of that is the design of the weapon, and the other part of it is the design of the trigger. It's just not conducive to shooting tight groups, and it is an inferior weapon. Anybody who is currently using that is either broke or simply not paying attention to the world around them. WTD Concepts asks, how do you think the U.S. market would evolve if suppressors were taken off the NFA? Well, first, I would say that in the short term, not a whole lot. In the long term, I would say that as far as the suppressors themselves are concerned, I think that companies that are simultaneously unable to innovate and unable to market will fall by the wayside because the barrier to entry will fall away, and everybody and their brother will be making them. Now, in the short term, I definitely think that there will be no change in the cost structure of the devices. They're still going to cost roughly the same. The technology doesn't get any cheaper than it currently is. It's pretty cheap to manufacture them. There still has to be a margin for success on those items, and because of that, you're not going to see the prices drop any lower than they already are. Deregulation of them probably won't impact that a whole lot. Now, will it decrease the overall cost? Yeah, because you won't have to pay the $200 tax stamp, but the actual cost of the unit probably won't change that much. Now, as far as the rest of the industry is concerned, there's kind of like this current division where there's companies that have suppressed in mind when they do their designs, and then there's companies that just forget about it. Like, it's not even on their radar. I think that you're going to see a larger share of those design concepts incorporate suppression into their design. So I think that that's a net positive for deregulation of items like suppressors. But as far as that pipe dream of like they deregulate suppressors to take them off the registry tomorrow and suddenly cans are through the floor cheap, that's never going to happen. Sorry. So if that's something that you're waiting on to purchase, if you're trying to play that game, you should have just bought it before, because they're not getting any cheaper. I don't care if everybody can produce them tomorrow. I just don't see that being, because there's a lot of technology that goes into squeaking out that last little bit. I want to say that as far as suppressor technology is concerned, we are playing with the last 10 to 15% on the technology, trying to refine that down. The amount of innovation that is required to close that last 15% gap is pretty extreme, and it's not getting any cheaper anytime soon. This question comes from a Sean Coey, and I'm going to have to do a little bit of interpretation on this because it seems to me like he started to write one question and then decided to write it a different way. So I'm going to interpret it as, is the Sig Spear a mistake as a service rifle choice? And is it better just as a DMR role? Question mark. I would say yes and no. No, I don't think it's a mistake because if we look at like the M4, I think it's about time that we start thinking about moving the military away from the M4, M16 family. There's been a lot of innovation in the last several decades, and if you look at the M4, depending on how you track its lineage back, we're talking about a rifle that's 40 to 60 years old. Again, depending on how you pick the reference point that you're operating off of. There's been a lot of stuff that has happened in that time, and the innovations in the short stroke systems, as well as the shorter buffer systems, I think that they have reached a point where they are ready for that kind of role, most certainly. What I would say is a mistake is the caliber choice. I don't know what the hell that they were thinking. There was nothing wrong with the 5.56. I don't understand how many people have to be killed with a cartridge before we can say that the issues of the past have been resolved. There's been a whole bunch of stuff about the 5.56 cartridge over the years, and I don't know how many millions of people NATO has to kill around the world with this cartridge before we can finally say, you know what, it works pretty good. This question comes from Sheldonus Rex. More power to you, brother. Is the box magazine fed select fire intermediate cartridge service rifle the next flintlock? Question mark. Will it take another 200 years for something fundamentally new to arrive? And I think what he's going for here is, if you think of the flintlock technology, it was in service for several hundred years before we made the leap to self-contained cartridges. So think like Civil War era is when we started seeing those repeater rifles that had self-contained cartridges. What he's equating that to is up from the Civil War to now, we have been using self-contained technology. Now we have refined self-contained ammunition technology very, very well, to the point where the specialized materials that we're using and the specialized weapons that we're using to deliver them can deliver an amazing amount of accuracy out to miles and stuff like that. So we have refined that technology pretty much to its point at this juncture. I don't think that there is a major innovation that is going to give us 20% better on what we're currently doing. I'm thinking that we're currently working at the end of that fuse, probably like 5% tweak at the very end. There might be some material science there that we haven't quite discovered yet, or haven't really brought to market yet. It might even have been discovered, but that is pretty much at the technological peak of the self-contained ammunition. Now, I think of a couple different things for next gen stuff. I'm thinking either the self-contained cartridge that has moved to a component reduction. So what we're talking about is like the old rocket munitions stuff that had the propellant inside the projectile itself. There's some unique challenges associated with that sort of thing. First and foremost, making sure that all of the propellant burns inside the gun so that it's not doing things in the external ballistic phase, because that creates inaccuracy. That's one of the reasons that whole premise was abandoned. The next thing that I would look at is things like railguns. Railgun technology has gotten substantially better. Currently, high-powered railguns are still the size of tanks, but they are producing some handheld versions, but they're still only producing like 400, 500 feet per second, stuff like that. There's still some technological innovation to happen there. It really comes down to capacitor size and battery size. So how much weight of battery are you carrying and capacitors? What does the ammunition look like, et cetera, et cetera? That's really the whole problem there, is how do you make that better than a 7-pound AR-15 that holds 30 rounds of ammunition? that's a pretty tall order right now to compete with, right? So that's the tipping point, is when we can shrink that technology to the point where it can compete with what we can currently do with the self-contained munitions of today. If you're talking about energy weapons, we're far away from energy weapons at this point in time. Same problem, disperse energy in a concentrated manner in a portable fashion. That takes technology that we don't currently have. So 200 years from now, do I still think that they'll be using contained cartridge munition firearms? Probably. Red Devilish Child. Whatever, man. Will SCOTUS make another Pro 2A decision soon? Is there something brewing in the lower courts? Yes. I believe that they will make a ruling on the Rahimi case soon, and there's another question farther down that I will bring up in post and talk a little bit about the Rahimi case. This one's coming up from lower in the stack because it deals with the Rahimi case. Does the new Rahimi case jeopardize the Bruin decision? Well, I would look at it a couple different ways. The lower court, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Rahimi case, basically, dude, convicted, domestic violence, restraining order type thing, and he is under a firearms disability. He challenged that as not Second Amendment viable, and at the district court, the decision of the lower court was upheld. At the appellant level, they said it was unconstitutional, and therefore, if you have a domestic violence restraining order and you live in the Fifth Circuit, then it is not constitutional for them to keep you from exercising your Second Amendment rights. That was appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has granted certiorari, and we're waiting for that case to be heard. Here's the thing about that. I could see this breaking either way, because oftentimes the Supreme Court, if they agree with the decision of the lower court, will say, hey, yeah, they're right, and we're going to stick with their decision. So I'm going to say that we're going to see the limits defined for the Bruin decision with this case. I think this one is going to push the limits of I think the Rahimi case is going to push the limits that the test can be applied for the Bruin decision. And basically what that's going to come down to is what sort of historical analogs are going to be acceptable or not acceptable for application of a firearms disability. And that will be very interesting to see. You're going to have to tune in here and various other places to find that when it comes down, but that is still pending litigation, so I can't really speak on it definitively. But if I had to guess, I don't know that it will negatively impact the Bruin decision. I think that it will more closely define the limits of what the government can do as far as using historical analogs, and I think that's going to be a big feather in our hat going forward. Excuse me. I needed something to drink. Be a big feather in our cap going forward, and I'm looking very much forward to seeing what the Supreme Court comes up with in that case. RCB 4119 asks, is there a chance we will ever correct the sanctions so that milsurp market is what it once was? And I think what he's referring to are the regulations in 922. And 922 is currently under a fair amount of scrutiny currently. The justification for a lot of the 922 regulations is interstate commerce regulation, and it's really going to depend on how that shakes out in the courts. Currently, there are lots of challenges to 922 type stuff, particularly G regulations, but it wouldn't be a stretch for people to start challenging on 922R and some of those other ones that deal specifically with importation. So there is a good chance that we could see the rollback under the Bruin decision with the text history and tradition test for historical analogs. We'll see how that sort of shakes out. I'm not sure that a whole lot of analysis has been done on any kind of historical regulations on arms import of the era between the Second and 14th Amendment ratification. So the jury's still out on that one. I obviously have not done that research, but I think that there's a good chance that under the current climate, we might see a rollback of those 922 regs. Elliot Spencer asks the following question. What is the #1 handgun sold in the USA? From Elliot in the UK. Well, Elliot, it really depends on how you ask that question, and I can't really answer it as you asked it, so I will give you a couple answers. If you're asking for total units sold in like the last several decades that is currently a model that is offered, then you're looking at Glock. If you're looking at something like, hey, what is the most popular handgun of 2022? Well, then that would have been the Sig models. If you're looking at the most popular handgun manufacturer by sales, well, then you're looking at Smith & Wesson. So it really depends on how you ask the question and what particular thing that you're looking for. So one of those is going to be your answer depending on how you parse the data. Fire Rotor asks, how can I get an AR lower with the VSO logo on it? I'm an Ohio resident. Well, you guys have seen over the years, I've had several rifles with the logo on them. Some of them I had custom done, laser engraved. Other ones are direct from the factory. Those are VSOrdnance rifles, and you can find them at their website. Sweet Meat NC asks, meow or meow? Well, it depends who I'm talking to. If I'm talking to my girlfriend, it's meow. If it is a telemarketer, then it's meow. Is this Cortez? Can I speak to Cortez? Meow. And then in closing today, the last 3 questions, we're not going to list the handles of the people who posted them, and you'll see why here shortly. And they all have the same answer. So I'm going to answer them collectively as one question. Why don't we talk more about we the people putting foot to ass against this government? ? How do I get a black market Glock switch? I keep hearing that these are flooding the streets, but I ain't seen any. And then, what's the best way to form a local militia to fight government tyranny? Because you know they're going to pick people off one by one. And my mouse just died. Based on all those names, I'm going to call you all gentlemen and say, Step 1, leave mom's basement. Step 2, go touch grass. Step 3, go to the gym. And then step 4, nice try, Fed boy.